Good evening, everyone. I nearly said good morning. That's how bad it's got. So hello, everyone. I'm hoping, as usual, that you can hear me, that you can see me. I'm sure feedback will be prompt and brutal if not. But from what I'm seeing, everything's good. So super excited about this evening. We have Graham back. That's not what I'm super excited about, but he is here. But no, we have the legend that is Dan Rubin, and I'm going to bring people in straight away. There we go. We have Dan Rubin in the middle. We have Graham on the side. I shouldn't be too mean to Graham. It was his birthday yesterday, which is true. So welcome to your birthday party. But firstly, welcome to Dan. Thank you so much for joining us. How are you doing?
Hey, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure. And since I haven't said it yet, happy birthday, Graham.
Thank you very much, Dan. Thank you.
That's what this was all about, actually, this evening. It was all about Graham's birthday.
Yes, that's the surprise, Graham.
It's just what I wanted. It's just what I wanted.
Anyway, lovely to catch up. I'll close it down now. No, so Dan, you had well, when I put out that you were kindly joining us this evening, a lot of people were very excited. A lot of people used the little Q&A thing just to tell me that they're excited, and I was like, that's not a question, man. Come back to me with something a bit more meaningful. But no, it's absolutely brilliant. And then what I didn't realise was the timing of Ilford's lockdown interview with you that was yesterday, I think it was released, or the day before. So excellent pre-reading for Graham and his quiz, I'm hoping later, using some of those. But let's kick off. So first of all, I hope you're well. We like to spend the time here escaping from the outside world, so we're not going to say the C word. What's the C word, Graham?
Country file this week.
There we go, country file, important, good. So we're not going to say the C word, but it is important because you are known for your jet setting. How are you doing and where are you?
I'm doing all right. I'm doing fine. I am in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, just north of Miami, which is as sunny as you might think, but not as beachy because the beaches have been closed since I got stranded here. This is my hometown, so I was visiting family for a few weeks right when everything got, kind of shut down travel-wise. So now I've been here 10 weeks total, which is the longest time I've been here since I moved away about 7 years ago.
And are you was it a case where you sort of saw the way things were going and you chose to say this is where I'm going to spend a few weeks, or was it the other way around?
A bit of a mixture. The day that I was scheduled to fly out, it was March 16th. So travel had not been stopped yet everywhere. Some places it had. And I was, but the events that I had that first week, there was one in the photography show in Birmingham, had already been, I was going to be landing on the 17th and going straight to Birmingham and right into a photo walk with Ilford. So like that had already been canceled or postponed the week before. And then I was heading up to Iceland for another conference later that same week. Both of those things had been either canceled or postponed, but I had a chain of travel that was all booked, Florida to the UK to Iceland, Iceland to the States again, the States back to Iceland, Iceland to the UK, then the UK to Vienna, and then to Italy. And then all of this crazy travel that I'd been working on for months. And because I knew I had this pretty intense travel schedule. It was all tied to projects and workshops and other things. I'd been keeping a very close eye since December, like late December, on all the news coming out about what was going on and seeing how it was spreading. And so I had a feeling that even into February that things might shift. So when I saw that they were, I thought, okay, well, the next month for sure, mid-March to mid-April is not going to be the same as what I'd planned. So let me move the first flight and request reimbursements for flights and trains for everything else. And at the time, I thought I'll just stay an extra month and see how things are, rather than risk getting stuck in the middle somewhere. And then within 2 more weeks, everything had actually been flat out canceled and travel was shut down. So it was a mixture of intentional and unintentional. It's all right. I think the fact that I took control over the situation rather than just waiting to see, I just postponed everything that was under my control, and that allowed me to start moving on other things right away rather than just sitting tight. And I think it's done me good. Well, I'm now kind of over committed in a way. Like I'm 8 weeks on from that, and I've got almost too much going on. and it's not all income generating. I haven't replaced all of the lost income, but not even close. But I've got new companies being formed, new side projects, new product design things. Nothing travel related, obviously, but all sorts of other stuff. So it's been, yeah, I think I'm doing okay. Like, it's a lot of people keep asking me, but you're so used to traveling. How does it feel to not go anywhere? I'm like, it feels fine. I had I love traveling, but it's exhausting.
Yeah, no pros and cons. I mean, it's interesting. I think it was Lena Besanova, one of the analog photographers in Europe. I think she did actually get caught between things. I think she was going from Italy to Russia and ended up in a layover in Germany, not being able to continue. And then being like, right, I'm in this city, like none of her gear, none of her things. And I think the last thing I saw was she was basically getting stuff together to create a darkroom wherever she was. But no, I mean, I think a lot of people who know you or follow you might have come across you on Twitter or Instagram, where you have huge followings, or seen some of the work you've done. In fact, someone's just written in, actually, Frederick Travatten, saying, "Hey Dan, just want to thank you for always taking the time to answer my analog newbie questions on Twitter. It means a lot." And that, I think, is when I wrote up, the spiel for why people should come and spend time listening to us talk to someone. And Dan Rubin, it was like, in fact, I think it was stolen from the Ilford thing, where it was like photographer, designer, musician, and teacher. And then I said, and a lovely chap, which is definitely true. And I think one of the things that really stuck with me is when we spoke just when you were in the middle of all that rearranging. And I was like, the whole world's, as we know. And you were like, I think I'm going to give myself a day to freak out about it, like, properly, and then I'll worry about stuff. And I was like, I like that idea. Like, let's not pretend that we shouldn't freak out. Let's not try and do stuff while also freaking out. You're like, no, I'm just the next 24 hours is going to be absolute write-off. Then I'll worry about it. And I think that's a healthy approach, and it sounds like it went well. So you've got, I mean, the one that jumped out at me from all of that is some ideas for companies in the middle, as you do.
I'm very lucky. I have a lot of creative friends between my design career and photography, and also, the filmmaking, to be honest, because I've met a lot of fantastic filmmakers, directors, cinematographers, DPs, especially in London. And that's my next kind of area that I've been slowly learning a lot about over the last handful of years and inching my way toward. And across all of those people, we're all problem solvers. And if given a problem, it doesn't matter what the scale of the problem is, like that's what our brains all kind of go to. And so all of the chats I started to have those first few weeks of being stuck here were with all of my friends who were similarly stuck, whether it was at home or, all their work had disappeared. We were all in a situation where we were kind of like going, oh, okay, we got to figure some new stuff out. And it was just a bunch of brainstorming, call after call after call, and small projects, big ideas that might never happen. But, when you get a blank slate like that, I think everyone's energy kind of peaks because you're just looking for something positive with forward momentum. And so you just throw yourselves at things. And that's kind of how I've always been, and my brother and I both. And so it's mostly my fault. Like, I'll have a conversation with someone, say, "Hey, how you doing?" They'll be like, "Yeah, it's all right. I'm just kind of wait and see." And I'm like, "Well, hey, why don't we do this?" Or what do you think about X, Y, Z? Yeah. And I know some other people, though, who are independently of me, people I've worked with who are starting up completely new businesses out of this because they see that the model's shifting in whatever their industry is, or they're saying, well, the model might shift back, but we don't know what kind of time, and why not get a month or 2 or 3 or 6 ahead of the rest of the world while they're all sitting waiting to see what happens. And that's my mindset too. So yeah, it's kind of nuts. I feel busier, and that's a word I don't like using, but in this case it is true. I feel busier and more hectic than I did 8 weeks ago, when I was already had this like flat out crazy schedule of product launches and workshops and travel. And I don't quite know how to wrap my head around that.
No, I think it's
interesting,
though, because
my friends think it's normal. They look at me and they go, "Yeah, that's just you being you." So I guess that's.
I think there's a difference though between, and I've definitely felt this at times in sort of my previous career, corporate career, where you can be very busy doing a lot of things, but that's not the same as necessarily being stimulated in the same way. Especially if the things you're doing you've done before. Like, I know about myself that doing something the first or the second time is always way more exciting for me than doing it the third or fourth. And if you find yourself in that pattern, even though you're busy, even though you're flying everywhere, doing everything, it can be changed. No, it's very inspiring to hear, because I think it's probably giving people heart palpitations as well, who are who are worried that they're wasting this time. But
oh well, but no one should wait. So no one should be worried about. There is no such thing as wasting time during a pandemic. I think, honestly, I know there are different opinions on it, but it's also too much pressure to put on yourself to say I should be using this time for something, because the reality is, like I said, when we talked right when everything was shifting around, I knew I needed to give myself at least a day of like just freak out, because it was a massive change. But I also know that humans are really good at managing change and handling change. So, but it's cognitively, it's if we're in the right frame of mind. So when we're super relaxed, we're really good. We can take on anything. When we're stressed out, we lose the ability to think laterally, and that means that we can't solve problems. So you have to. That's why it's good to kind of go for a walk or a run and clear your head, because the goal is actually just to chill yourself out, and that when you're stressing about things, you can't solve problems. So throughout, I've actually taken lots of days actually in these last 8 weeks to just go, nope, this day is not going to be anything at all. And, like a month ago, I thought, or maybe it was even 5 or 6 weeks ago, I thought, oh, you know what? I've been putting off using Duolingo to learn French, or why don't I know what I'll do. I'll do 5 minutes every morning on French, German, and Portuguese, because those are 3 languages I'm fascinated about.
Yep.
I think I kept it up for like 5 days, and it was going really well. And then there were other things happened, and I can't beat myself up over it, because that's kind of what I've been doing, is going, I have nothing to do for the time being, so let's just start filling that time. And I never expect everything to stick. It's also why I like collaborating with other people, because it keeps you honest. There's accountability when you have to schedule a meeting or a phone call, or you go, hey, let's check back in 3 days. I've got a weekly call actually with 3 other friends who are all around Europe, where we just, one of them, my friend Kate, set it up the first or second week of everyone being locked down, and just said, hey, let's just chat for an hour every week and see how you're all doing. But also, if you're working on anything, we can hold each other accountable. And it's been great, because it's zero pressure, but it's just enough that I should probably make some progress on those things. So yeah, I don't know.
No, I like that. And also,
if anyone's listening, don't feel pressured for.
Well, I think as well, it's
being insane.
At the same time, having something like that, I mean, I think it also helps to have something that you can call it quits, and that's also okay. Like, if you turn up to that meeting, I'm presuming you can also, it's also totally acceptable to say, I was working on that thing, I've canned it, whether for good reason, bad, doesn't matter, but at least you have a decision. Whereas I sometimes find if you have a whole amount of time, you have these projects, some of them can last longer than they should without ever finishing.
Oh yeah, you got to know when to pull the plug on things.
Okay, then. So let's move a little bit more towards photography.
Sure.
Although I'm sure many of those businesses touch. So when you wrote in the upper thing, I think it stands out, because when I talk to you, it's very hard to bucket sort of your work into this or that, or and now I'm understanding more why. If you start 10 businesses in a week, that tends to happen. But you sort of say designer, photographer, musician, and teacher. Is it in that order? Is that an equal amount? How do you put those 4 things? And I'm assuming there's probably more than 4 really, but they feel like the biggest things to you. How do you, in normal life, bucket how you spend time on each of those skills?
Well, I definitely don't really put them in buckets. They're the categories and titles and things like that are really useful for other people to frame things. But I like, for instance, design. I usually think of myself as a designer, as a personality type. It's not a vocation as much as it is just it's who I am. It always has been. I've always been a problem solver. I've always been very creative. So when I've been a designer since my mid-teens, and when I came across that as a thing that you could do, and you could do as a career, and people would pay you for, I thought, oh, this is great. This is this is easy. I just want to do this all the time. Whereas photography comes really naturally to me, but it didn't come naturally to me until I was 30, 31. Like, I didn't pick up a camera until I was about 30. And that feels crazy to me in hindsight, because I was a painter. I did oils and watercolors in my teens. I was doing scale models. I did graphic design. I was doing music. I was all these visually creative things, as well as the music side. And just cameras never made sense to me. So I don't feel like I am I think I will always be a photographer now. I've always seen the world in that way, but when I was younger, I tried to translate that into paintings. So it wasn't, that part of my brain isn't tied to the tool and to the output. It's a thing where I'm always seeing scenes. I've always seen light, even though I didn't know how to capture it. I've always seen shapes and lines and images that I wanted to snapshot. It's the same as me wanting to get into filmmaking. I don't feel like I've certainly not always been a filmmaker. That's not my personality type. I wouldn't even say I'm really a storyteller. I love stories. I love hearing them, but I'm not a natural storyteller. It's why I like documentary work better. I like seeing the story and communicating it and conveying it and capturing it and distilling it. That is something that's a natural personality trait. So those buckets for me are more like designer is kind of who I am, as well as one of the things that I do. Photography is something that I do that allows me an outlet for something that I do innately, which is just see things all the time. And music is also, I've been very musical since apparently I was like 3 or 4. So I assume that I'm just a very musical person. Yeah. And then the output for me is primarily just a hobby. So it's not a professional thing. I'd love to get into doing more composition outside of the hobby side. And that'll probably come along with filmmaking. I'll start composing soundtracks for some of the shorts that I do, I think. So yeah, and teaching is just, again, that's another personality type. My mom's a teacher. She was trained in the UK and then moved to the US and raised my brother and me both to basically we're just teachers as personality types. We love sharing what we get excited about. And I've always consciously understood that when I teach, I learn. So teaching for me is actually a tool that I use when I get excited about something. One of the first things I try to do is teach it to anyone who will listen. So if I get an opportunity to teach, I jump at it. If there's someone who asks me a question, it's why I'm always willing to answer, because if I don't know the answer, I'll say, I don't know, but let me go find out. And then I just go into this rabbit hole of research about that, whatever that topic is, that person could have researched just the same as me. But rather than me saying, with most topics, I don't have that reaction of just go look it up yourself, because I know that most people just find that tedious or don't know how. When I was like 8 or 9 years old, I would ask my mother to take me to the library so I could look things up. Pre-internet. So when the internet came along, I thought that was the best thing ever, because I had access to information.
Oh my God, it's a library at home. That's exactly what people think of the internet as.
So I think that should paint a bit more of a picture of how those things all connect. It's just they're all me and who I am, and I try as hard as I can to spend my time doing things that come naturally. It doesn't mean that they're easy, but they're things that I feel like I should be doing inherently. They suit my personality type. They suit my brain. If they don't, there are other people who could do those things that way. And that's another reason I partner with a lot of people and I try to collaborate with people, because I can't do everything. I wouldn't want to. What I want to do is do the things that I'm really good at, that I have the ability to be exceptional at, and put all my energies into those, and then work with other people who are good at the other things.
Yeah. No, and actually, someone who Graham and I know very well, co-hosts with Graham, Rachel, who's a film photographer, works with Ilford as well over here. She said, this sounds very familiar. And actually, the way you described that, I'm sure a lot of people hear that. I love the thought of bucketing almost by personality types rather than, as you say, job labels, because it does feel a bit very arbitrary as soon as you're out of any kind of structure. And even though a lot of people in the film photography know you in particular for your film photography work, you've always talked about yourself as a photographer, and actually even that feels like now you're describing it, too zoomed in, you're sort of like, as you say, you see a scene visually and want to capture it. Photography as a means, film photography as a means within a means. And I love the chat we had, I can't remember when it was, back in January, where you talked about this a little bit. So do you mind... From what I remember, you sort of said you went from one into the other and back again a little bit. I think you start off an instant. Was that it? How do you describe your photography, and how's your relationship with digital versus film, or is it more subtle than that?
Well, no, I think it's about as subtle as a sledgehammer, really. But they're tools, right? Everything is a tool. Just with and I have a lot of experience with this framing, from years before I ever picked up a camera. So it made it easy to actually understand the differences and how to frame it for myself. Like if I'm drawing on paper, I have lots of different ways to draw. I can use markers, I can use brushes, I can use pens, I can use different pencils, and each of those are drawing, each of those are writing implements, but they're completely different in how you use them and the result that you get from them. And so you use them in different contexts. And some people prefer one over the other. Some people can get really, really nuanced with those, but essentially they're tools that do similar things, but the similarity stops as soon as you get to the specific tool and what it was made for. Photography for me is the same as drawing. It's an umbrella term. And it's where a lot of the confusion comes from between things like film and digital, because people try to see them, or not try, people see them as the same thing. And that's where the arguments come from. And they're not the same thing. They're completely different. They just happen to be methods of capturing light through a lens. But that's where the similarities stop. Like a pen and a pencil, you hold in your hand and you use in a very similar way, but that's where the similarities stop. What they are after that is completely different. And in photography, that's, for me, I love photography. I love being able to capture things. I use my iPhone still more than any other camera that I have.
Great.
And that's with me preferring film photography. But the preference is not tied to frequency. It's tied to a lot of other creative and process things. So a film camera isn't right for me to capture the snapshot things that I do on my phone. It would actually be a waste of film.
It's very difficult to WhatsApp a roll of film. I've tried it.
It's not quite the same.
Yeah.
It's all about in the moment. What is the best thing? I travel with a digital camera, regardless of whether I think I need one. I have my Leica Q in my bag all the time. I barely use it, right? But it's there because if I need to shoot in the dark, I'm not picking up a film camera. I'm not using my iPhone. And whether that's for shooting in really low light for me or for a client, I've used it on a couple of client projects as well. And it's just, I wouldn't have been able to shoot it any other way. That's not the primary type of work that I do, so I don't actually need to treat digital as a primary tool in that way. It's very much secondary, but it used to be primary. I was shooting digital much more, and for all of my commercial work when I started out, rather than film, because my relationship with film was one of that was the hobby. It was all a hobby to begin with, but I didn't understand the potential of film, and I really hadn't learned enough about it. And digital was an easier intro because I was used to digital tools. I got the idea of what a raw file could do versus a JPEG, and I looked into film. And initially, I was doing this all on my own. I didn't have anyone to talk to about it, so I looked into film and started to see a lot of chemistry, and I just was like, I'll do that later. I'll keep shooting for fun. But once I actually learned more, I got to the point where I learned a lot about digital and started to run up against all of its problems, all of its barriers and issues. And I started to look at film, and just the difference in the process for me is what gets me the most. I enjoy shooting without seeing what I'm capturing, because for me, seeing what I'm capturing when I'm serious about it is a distraction. It's why I like instant photography. I can see it soon, but not right away. And instant was actually what the Polaroid SX70 was, the camera that got me into photography when I was 30. And it was as a design object, like I said. And I shot a couple of packs, and then I loved it. And I'd never had that reaction to images that I'd captured before. And that made me completely want to reverse engineer and unpack my relationship to it, the cameras, film, digital, all this stuff. So you fast forward 5 years from that, when I'd had probably 10 to 15 film cameras at that point and 2 digital cameras, went down the Canon SLR route. And I was starting to get hired for things. I was shooting things on my 5D Mark II. I got into Sony cameras as well, because I was fascinated by what they could do technically. And very quickly, I realized that I was enjoying the results the most when I was using my old lenses, which is something I loved about the Sonys. And then I realized that what I loved about what I was chasing was the look that I would get from my handful of rolls that I would shoot a year on film. And I just thought, why am I spending all this time trying to make my digital look like film? Let me just shoot film and learn more about it. And honestly, that was the it was just this constant learning process that got me there. And now that I know a ton about both, I have a preference personally, but I just see them as tools. And I think that's the arc that everyone goes through. You go through it more quickly if someone teaches you. It took me way longer because I was just teaching myself, and it was like pulling teeth. I can be a great student for other people, not for myself. I was just like learn and learn and learn and learn, and not know when I've gone down the rabbit hole enough and I need to just go back a little bit. So it's just one of those things. Like I think as someone who's spent the majority of my life, again, from when I was about 16, I was professionally working with digital tools as a designer. I'm 42 now, so I've spent 2/3 of my life properly working around digital. And as a designer, I work mostly around design and tech. I'm kind of now at the point where I want less tech, less digital in my life, unless it's the right tool. I don't want it by default. And it got to the point where it was by default. So now I'm a fan of manual typewriters. Like I'm a huge fan of manual and analog tools. I like pens. I like pencils. I like paper. I like typewriters. I like film. There's an aspect of, it's just the same reason why everyone, when they get into cooking, tends to really like cooking. It's because we're working with our hands and we're doing a thing that we have direct contact with. There's no avatar.
Do you think for you as well, you mentioned this briefly before we started filming, there's definitely, I think a lot of people will definitely resonate with that physical, tangible part, especially when so much of our lives are digital by default. But as a designer as well, it's a common observation, and I think you probably have more detail and more experience with than anyone else, that a lot of those things you mentioned seem better designed. They look nicer, they feel nicer in use. Do you agree with that? Is that part of it for you?
It is part of it for me, because there's a level of enjoyment of using a tool, right? That is heightened when that tool has been designed well. And there was a time where a lot of artists would make their own tools because of that, because there was such an innate connection with the tool that you needed to craft it yourself, because the process of crafting it, whether it's making your own canvas or making your own brushes for painters, right? The process of making those things was part of the art. And you knew it was perfect for you because you'd made it that way. And I think there's an extension of that. People, again, chefs spend a lot of time and money on the tools, on their pots and pans and their knives and everything else, because it makes a difference to your enjoyment. It might not always make such a functional difference. And that's one of the arguments that I hear come up a lot with photography about analog versus digital, is that, well, it's a photograph. At the end of the day, does the client or the viewer, do they know the difference? And I think that's a straw man argument. It's like, oh, it doesn't matter if they know the difference or not. If it matters to you when you're capturing it, when in your process, that's what should matter. I'll agree, it doesn't matter. My clients, it's why I was able to start shooting film for clients. I would start integrating bringing a film camera along on my shoots, where I was primarily shooting digital, and I would shoot some of it. And I got myself used to it over the course of about a year. And I realized that the clients didn't know the difference. They didn't care. Honestly, I could shoot on an iPhone and the clients didn't know the difference as long as the resolution was good enough. So that's one part of the equation, but I think that's a positive. I think that's a reason to realize that you're free to use whatever tool you want, is that as long as the end result is something that you love and that you are getting hired to create, if it's a business proposition, and if it's not, if it's just personal, it should be all about what you enjoy the most. And it literally doesn't matter what anyone else thinks or about it.
Yeah, and a lot of people, I know I have quite a few customers who are professional photographers, who would say they shoot professionally, digitally, and personally on film. Because of that point, they enjoy film, the process, but they feel like the client either demands it faster or cheaper or whatever, and the cost can't do it. You've managed to do it, and as I say, I'm not surprised you integrated it slowly, because I can imagine turning up to the first shoot, I've only got a large format, let's do this. I forgot film, never mind. You'd walk your way into it. But do you feel Is it a case where you choose jobs where you know you have the time and budget to shoot film, or is it that people know that you do it and that's then expected? Like, how do you pitch for jobs, or how do you win jobs where the client won't care?
It's a mixture. So the first thing is that my base assumption is that no one cares. No one knows. They don't. They if they're hiring you for your work, for your style, for your reputation, whatever else, they literally don't care, because they're not hiring you because you shoot Canon. They're not hiring you because you, right. And like in digital, it's pretty much like that all the time. And they're not hiring you because you shoot digital or a particular camera brand, unless you're an ambassador for that company. And like literally, that is the only reason why anyone would care. But people have this idea that it is important, and they do care. And again, I learned this before I got into photography, because as a designer, I ran a small agency, and I've always been a consultant. And what you learn very quickly, what I learned, I hope other people learn it, is that you are being hired for your experience and expertise. The client doesn't know how to do what you do. That's why they need to hire you. So if you are making sure that the clients are hiring you for the right reason, which you always have to do. One of my first questions to any prospective client in any kind of work is, how did you find me, and why did you get in touch with me? Because that tells me, those two questions tell me all I need to know about how this relationship is going to go. If they're just looking for anyone who can hold a camera, probably not going to be the kind of project I would like to work on. And so that's one of the important things for me that leads to good projects. If it's, like I said, I think digital and film are both equally good tools when used for the right thing. For me, film can do 90% or more of what I would like to do with it. But if there's a project that someone approaches me for that I would really like to do, and film was the wrong choice, I'm not going to mention anything about that. Like, I know digital is the right choice, so I'll use the digital.
Yeah.
And it's all about what the project is and whether it's something I want to put my time into. If it's something I want to put my time into and I can shoot it on film, I shoot it on film, and I don't mention it to the client unless I need to. And that, where you mentioned things like timelines, a lot of people are worried that the turnaround time is going to be a limitation for shooting film. I have never found that to be the case. Well, I say never. There have been probably 2 shoots in the last 3 years where there were things that I was shooting where some of it needed to be turned around right away, but shot on a big camera. So I needed Wi-Fi, and I didn't shoot those things on film. The rest of those projects I did shoot on film, because not all the images were time dependent. So even that, like shooting hybrid, there's such a space for doing it if you're open to it. And for the rest of the time, my main lab in London, Bayer, if I drop things off to them, if I drop film off to them right when they open in the morning, 9 or 10 o'clock, even in that range, I will typically have scans in my inbox before the end of day. And even if it comes to the next day, that's much faster than I need to get anything to the client. And actually, it's much faster than I would be able to review all of the digital files and do edits. And like, basically they're sending me things that almost need no work other than a little bit of cropping and straightening, and maybe some retouching, but usually minor. And then I'm done. So once I realized that film for me was actually way more time efficient, which blows people's mind, and I have to explain it to them usually. I've even done a couple of talks on this, but I go, like, it's actually cheaper for me time-wise to shoot film than it is digital. But again, I don't need to tell the client that, because if they like the images, they don't care. Very few people, in answer to the other part of your question, very few people hire me because I shoot film, and I'm okay with that. I want to be hired because people like the way that I capture things, like the way I tell stories or do editorial or whatever it happens to be. If they like my work, that's the stuff that's going to last me 10, 20, 30 years, because other things will change in that time. And it's the same with my design. I want to get hired for my problem solving, not because I make things look a certain way. So I've always tried my hardest to avoid any visual signatures in my design work when it's for other people. It all needs to be about their brand, not about my artistic preference. It's not art, it's design. I'm solving a problem. I treat it the same way-ish with commissions for clients, except in there, it kind of has a blurred line. It is my style, but I want to be hired. I want to be hired for my style, not for the medium.
No, that makes sense. Graham, we've not really pulled you in. Is there anything there that?
Happy birthday, Graham!
Exactly. Exactly. It's lovely to have you along. Is there anything there that resonates particularly, that hybrid approach, or the way, the way using both?
I'm just really interested. I wonder, because obviously, your background in design, all of these things seem to fit together. They mesh together very well. Do you think that the things that influence sort of good design, and good things that, in terms of clearly expressing ideas, simplicity, elegance, and all of those things that obviously you've carried through then into your photography, do you think that those things also, when transferred to the tool that you're using, help make better work, whether it is cameras or typewriters or wherever it is? And so that's why things like digital cameras, which are they're more convoluted by their very nature, it's harder to make a connection with them, and then perhaps harder to create that sort of flow of work, because you haven't got that nice smooth transition through that good design gives you.
There's a bit of that. I think that I've always felt you needed to know your tools, whatever it is. You need to know your tools inside and out before you can forget about them and actually use them to their full potential. Whether that's a computer or a specific piece of software that you're using, or again, pens, brushes, canvases. The more familiar you are with the tool, once you get to the point where you know it so well that you don't need to think about it, it becomes an extension of you, and that's when you can actually start to sing and move really quickly with any of your work. And it's the same with an instrument for musicians, right? It's not just about the practice. It's about knowing that instrument and being able to feel its change. Yeah, like if you're a guitarist, every guitarist I know, especially the ones who play acoustic guitars, they can tell when they've shifted to a different level of humidity because they can feel it in their instrument, right? Like they know that they know something's off and they need to retune and they need to adjust to the way they play it. So I think the same is true with the camera. Now, so 2 examples here. I brought props.
Hang on, I'm going to make you big screen so you get all of the view.
Oh gosh, scary. Okay. So one of the things, and I'm playing devil's advocate here for a second, because we think of analog, and most people think of analog and they think like manual. Like this is one of my favorite manual film cameras, a Leica Flex SL. It is just a lovely, lovely beast, underrated, I think, by most people, even Leica fans. And this has a battery, but it's only for the meter. It's basically an M6, but as an SLR. And it's a lovely thing. And it's nothing. It's manual wind, manual focus, manual aperture. Everything's manual. You just got to do it all. That's what people associate typically, I think, with analog, right? I've got here the rest of my playthings that I'm stuck. I've got a pen FT, same thing, battery for a meter, but otherwise it's fully mechanical. Rolleiflex, no battery, fully mechanical, everything. That isn't analog, or that is analog, but it's not the borders of it. This beast here is a Canon 1N RS, right? This was made for sports photography. It shoots 10 frames per second. It has a pellicle mirror. This is like modern technology even now, because this can keep up with some of the best mirrorless modern cameras as far as FPS is concerned. It's also very expensive to shoot a roll of film in 3 seconds.
Especially when you accidentally uploaded Velvia. You're like, damn.
But, oh God, this now I have to try that. But this is analog, but this is a computer. This is just the same essentially as any of the modern Canon DSLRs. It does all of the thinking for you. You can put it on fully manual, but it is a computer sitting in here. And a lot of the time that argument is made that the more modern tools are the problem. In a way that's true, but I think it becomes much more nuanced. So you can still love this, just like you can still love a 1DX Mark II. I think that's where the nuance in design starts to be a problem for me. And everyone's different. There are loads of people who adore the Sony Alphas. I still have an A7R II. I sold my A7S II and my S over the last few years, though I think I got that wrong. I loved those a little bit more than the R2 is just like a high res computer, and I can't form a connection with it. But there are aspects of the physicality that I can't connect with. There's part of that is the complexity. I think complexity, as you were saying, Graham, gets in the way. And if you go back to what I said earlier about having to know your tool inside and out before you can really start to use it as an extension of you, I think that just becomes harder, not impossible, but harder the more complex a camera is. Even with this thing, you flip open this side panel here, and there's like there are buttons in here that allow you to access control functions that you can set about like how the camera auto rewinds, or if it auto rewinds, if it leaves the leader out, how it auto focuses, does it bracket, how does it bracket? And most people might pick that up and never touch that, but then they're not using the full capability of the camera. And that's just, it doesn't mean that it's impossible to do and to love that tool. It just means it's harder than this, where there's just no, what do you need to learn? Focus, aperture, maybe the like like whatever, this self-timer, that's the word for it. Like there's a depth of field preview button somewhere. Like there's very little to learn about the thing. So it's a lot faster the learning curve is a lot less steep, basically, is what I'm saying. But that is design. So I've it's one of the reasons why I love the Leica Q. The minute I picked it up, I thought, oh, this is a camera I can learn everything that it can do really quickly, because it just doesn't do that much. But what it does, it excels at. But you still need to learn what it does and what it doesn't, where its edges are. And it's also, I think, why smartphone photography has blown up in its way, because until you start adding like lots of complex apps to the mix, the default camera apps are just point and shoot and tap to focus and a couple of things. So you can learn them to the fullest extent of what they can do really quickly. And that means that people can start getting creative faster. So, and again, like I said, there are film cameras, there are analog cameras that have really steep learning curves. So it is design, but it's not something that is just a problem with digital. It's just more of a problem with digital because there are more things you can do. There are more bells and whistles. And I don't think it's taken as seriously by most of the camera hardware companies. Not all. Fuji is excelling at people having an emotional relationship with their cameras because they're putting more time into the design decisions that they make about those dials and switches and what gets hidden behind a menu and what gets exposed so that you can learn it because you're going to be interacting with it physically all the time. That makes a difference. Sony hasn't quite learned that yet. But, that's one of the things I'm hoping to spend time on the next 5 years.
There we go.
Anyway.
Rachel's message actually saying, have you ever had a camera that you keep selling and then buying back again?
I've barely sold any cameras. So I'm trying to think if there are any that so I haven't bought anything back, but I'm trying to think of the ones I've sold. What do I miss? So I've sold a Bronica SQA, which was my first medium format SLR. Beautiful camera, but I was using my Hasselblad all the time, so I was like, this ought to go to someone else.
Yeah.
I've nearly sold the Rolleiflex, and I think I will probably sell the Rolleiflex, but only because I now know that I want one of the ones where I can swap out the hood so I can use the prism every once in a while.
That doesn't count. That's like upgrading software.
Yeah, well, so I will sell it and then buy another one. I've sold a Bessa, little 35 millimeter Voigtlander, but I don't miss that as well. No, I don't think so. But like, if there's a camera I've sold that I actually miss a lot, it was my 4x5 Vista, and it was a pain in the butt to use sometimes because it just would never quite fully lock down. Like there was a little bit of wiggle all the time, and I could never figure out how to get rid of it. And that just bugged me. But it was the most beautiful camera I've ever owned. It was a rosewood model, so rosewood or cherrywood. No, I think it was rosewood, and these little gold-plated metal accents. And if you had a short lens, like a 150 or 135, it had a little dimple in the bottom of the case, so you could actually leave the lens on to close it. Which I replaced it with a Chamonix F1, which is lovely and just machined perfectly. But I need to take the lens off every time. So it's a little bit, every time I use the Chamonix and I go, yes, this is great. This did what I wanted to. I fold it down and I go, oh, I missed the Vista.
If ever there was something that said how complex people's relationships with photography is, I think it's that conversation. This camera is better on every measure except I have to take the lens off.
Can I ask a quick follow-up question?
Yeah.
Can I ask a follow-up question? What is the crappiest camera that you love? Because of the way that it looks. What is the camera that you love the design of and you love that camera even though it's a piece of hot trash?
Ooh.
Great.
Oh, that is an excellent question that no one has ever asked me before. Because I think I know the exact opposite. that, well, like, okay, so a camera that I love the output from, but I despise the camera's design. Would that answer the question?
Well, that's an opposite, but I'd love to hear it.
It is the opposite. No, okay. So I'll go there first because I think I have an answer to the other one, but it's a harder thing. So I love the output of Mamiya 7 II. I think it's the most ugly design, and it's like it's lovely to use, but I don't want to look at it ever. It's just it is.
Someone hand it to me.
The worst thing.
And there we go. We're safe.
Yeah, it's the worst thing Mamiya designed, looks wise, aesthetically, but it is just, obviously it is a precision tool that sings and has some of the best lenses ever. The opposite of it, goodness, there are some ugly, there's some beautiful cameras that just make horrible images. Well, I think. Are we talking just analog here, or anything? Because the Sony Alphas win that for me, honestly. Like, they're just, like, I've tried and tried and tried, can't love them. They've been designed without any soul. And the images, though, the sensors are great. If you could strip, actually, it's one of the things that is on my infinite list of things to do, is to take my Sony Alpha, the A7R II, and strip the body from it entirely, just like dismantle the whole thing. So all I'm left with is that magnesium kind of core and the lens mount, and 3D print an actual beautiful, nice to hold body on the outside of it, that where I can still use the basic functions, because it upsets me that much.
And would you use that camera, or would you send it to Sony with a note that says "Love Dan"?
Well, I would do more than that. I'd write up a full case study about why I've made the changes I'd made, and I would make sure that got published, and that Sony knew about it. And then I'd probably send it to them, as long as I knew it was going to the right department.
That seems
just stick it in a wisdom body.
That seems absolutely fair. All right, then, I think it's time. Graham, do you have a velvet jacket somewhere nearby?
Oh, yeah, hang on. Yep,
oh my God, velvet
jacket. Well, when you have a quiz...
You didn't tell me there was a dress code.
When you have a quiz...
You should know.
You need a quiz master. And when you have a quiz master,
you know how we roll.
You need a jacket.
Yeah, true.
Graham, take it away. How well do you know Dan Rubin? Dan Rubin.
Okay, Dan. I hope you're ready for this, Dan. I'm going to start with going back a little bit. We didn't go too far back, you'll be pleased to hear. But going back to 2009, so it's not too far, right? Your blog, Superfluous Banter, which you kept going for quite a long time. You wrote about all sorts of different things, but I would love to know, you were writing, I think it might actually have been your last post, which is ironic given the subject matter. You were comparing the art of washing of a certain household item.
Yep.
To
it was. That site is so horribly dormant now, but it ran its course, I think. But yeah, The Art of Washing Forks was the title of that, and it was one of those random. It could have been a tweet, right? But it wasn't, and it was comparing basically the attention to detail. It was one of those random things that probably didn't need to be written, but I'm still glad I did. When like some people when washing, just pay attention to what's in between the tongs, and you can tell a lot about someone by how they wash a fork, right? Whether they're a detail-oriented person or they don't really care. And to me, it was this wonderful kind of simple metaphor for how people are with design, and how I approach design is that the details are the thing that makes the end result. And there's a lovely quote that basically sums that up in a much more beautiful way by Charles and Ray Ames, the chairs and textile designers, among other things, where the details aren't the details, they're everything. And I'm paraphrasing, but it's almost that. And there was just one day where I was in the middle of doing so many things, including procrastinating redesigning that blog, which I'd been working on for a couple of years at that point, the redesign, and I was washing dishes, and I just realized that that detail is that's where the fun is for me. I don't mind sometimes not finishing a personal project, as long as for me, it's not getting stuck in the weeds as a bad thing. It's like that's where the joy is. And if that joy kind of peters out and it's not worth finishing the thing, I'm okay with it. But that's where that toil, that kind of detail work is everything to me, and that's kind of what I was summing up in that silly blog post.
Given that the sort of the thrust of that post was, listen, I know that I'm not working on this and I'm not putting the effort and the detail into it, but when I do, it's all going to be there because this detail is so important. Was the last thing you ever wrote on that blog? Can we also assume that you threw all your forks in the bin as well? Okay.
Well,
okay.
It was, it's interesting though to look at that, because that was 2009, and I know like that the next year, that summer, I spent 2 months in the UK and a little bit of Europe. And at the beginning of 2010, I started living between countries. So actually, like my life, and I got into photography all around that same time. So life just actually took a turn in a different direction, where the things I was putting my time into were, as I said, that blog had kind of run its course. I was very active on it at one time. I really wanted to do a redesign. I still think about it every once in a while, and it's completely useless. That's 11 years ago. I don't need to be doing anything on that anymore. But that's what I mean. It's kind of the playground. I think I left it alone because the play was actually way more interesting and fun to me than thinking about actually publishing it to the rest of the world. I was having enough fun doing my explorations, and it was okay. And I think we might have said this before we even started recording, but we talked about the importance of just knowing when it's time to stop something and to give it up, or just to move on to the next thing. And that's a big example for me, because I put so much time into that personal site and that blog, and both writing, but also multiple redesigns, and some of them got published in books as well. But it stopped being something that served like enough of a purpose for me, and there were other things that were more interesting. So and I think that's okay. We got to all be okay with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, here's something you moved on to. You were one of the early testers for Instagram before that launched, and you've got a huge following on Instagram, and at this point you've got, I think, over 2,500 images on there. It's a huge number of images. I can tell you it takes a really long time to scroll through them. When you next speak to the chaps back at Instagram Headcube, can you say some sort of easier way to do this would be great?
Right.
And obviously, your early stuff was all phone photography. You were on there, so I'm going to ask you about one of your first pictures, because what's fascinating to me as somebody who was on there really early, you influenced a lot of people. Like, there's things that you will have been doing there that people have looked at, and you will have probably spawned some horrific trends over the years. In September 2010, so this was a post you made on Instagram a month before Instagram was even available to the people. Mm-hmm. I think it was one of your first 5 posts. You shared what's probably the first ever camera porn picture on Instagram. Again, like I said, spawning millions to follow. I would love to know, can you remember any of the cameras that were in, and these are analog cameras, these are from your collection, which, considering you only started in 2009, by 2010 you already had quite a lot of them. Which cameras do you reckon you included in this first picture of cameras on Instagram?
Wow, that is a good question, because I remember a lot of those early images, but I don't remember all of them. What did I have back then? That's the question. Oof, September. Good Lord. I'm guessing that an SX70 would have been in there, but it could have been another Polaroid, one of the plastic like one steps. Because I had both of those, I think, at that point. Maybe not. No Polaroids.
No, I don't think it was. They were some vintage. You're getting honked there.
Oh my goodness, no.
Vintage cameras. So I tell you what, I mean, these are the ones I could make out.
There would be a Hasselblad, maybe, or this could have also been. Wait, was it on a shelf?
Yes, there was some stuff. There were 3 cameras on a shelf.
Okay. So maybe a Nikon F. Nope. Leica M3.
You need to aim way down.
Oh, wait. Older shelf. Okay, maybe this was there an Argus C3 on there? Was there an Argus? Yes!
There was an Argus C3.
Argus C3, I cannot picture this image to save my life. So that is like, what was on that shelf? Argus C3. I had some cameras that were, again, they were just design objects. None of them worked. There might have been a Mamiya press on there, but I don't know if that ever made the shelf. Goodness, I think I'm going to completely fail this question.
No, I mean, you've got one of them. That's pretty good, I think. There was a Brownie reflex on there, some folding Kodak There's a Starmite box, I think, as well. There's all sorts of fun.
Graham, how many likes did that photo get?
That is a good question, Paul. I'm glad you asked that. It had 19 likes, which is pretty impressive for a month before Instagram launched. But only one comment. It had one comment. Can you tell me who that comment was from? Bearing in mind, and it's a contemporary comment. So your first post on Instagram has quite a lot of comments where people have gone back. But this one has one comment that's contemporary. And bearing in mind that this was September 2010, who do you think it was?
So it's not meaning from back then.
Yeah.
So it could have been Mike Krieger, co-founders. Kevin and Mike would have commented on things every once in a while. Sean Inman, maybe.
It was Kevin. It was indeed Kevin. So you the first camera porn picture ever shared on Instagram had a comment from the co-founder of Instagram, saying he was jealous. I'm not sure why I was telling me to be jealous of an Argus C3, but
I need to go print that out then.
Okay, next question. When you were working as creative director for Moo, you created some analog themed card sets. Can you remember what the names of those two analog themed card sets were?
The sets, yeah, camera positive and camera negative.
Oh, it's close. It's camera positive.
Oh, colon.
Okay.
The punctuation was implied.
It's never here. Okay. And I think this might be the last question, actually. Which camera from that Instagram post, that super early camera porn Instagram post, also made it onto your Moo camera designs for these cards?
That was the Argus.
That was the Argus. Oh, well done. See, that is why I asked you if there was a crap camera that you loved for its design, because I would say that maybe the Argus falls squarely into that camp.
Well, yeah, I can't judge it as a camera because mine is just completely like a frozen version. It will not work and it's not worth it. One day I would like to shoot one that is fully functioning just to see. Again, like the reason I bought that was because of researching cameras and history of 35 millimeter as well as other formats, and I found that was the camera that really first popularized 35 millimeter as a camera that people could afford, and it sold so many copies. And so I just thought, you know what, I need to have that. I need to hold it. I need to see what that felt like when it would have been this technological marvel for people. And it is weird. It's a little weird. But you know, I've shot a lot of older cameras. One of my recent favorites that I actually bought around that same time, 2009 or 10, was a Kodak Retina 1A from the mid 50s. Not even rangefinder, just a viewfinder camera. And what a joy to use! Like it's just such a beautifully machined thing that has a beautiful lens on it, and it's not complicated, but it's amazing how well it works 70 years on, right? Just incredible.
And then, so that was a very impressive score, actually. That might even be the high score. I wasn't counting fully. Was that 3.5, Graham? What do you think?
Yeah, sure.
Yes, there we go.
Are we scoring on the QI scale where it's just pretty much just random?
Yeah, exactly.
So that works for me.
Exactly. Yeah, 3.5. In fairness, that is the high score. The first few people made 1 or 2 at best. That was really impressive. One question, because a lot of us who are either photographers as hobby or have businesses or both rely on Instagram as part of our daily lives. How was it at the start? And as you've seen it grow, you've seen it go through adverts, you've seen it go through the infamous move from a timeline to an algorithm, you've seen it be bought by Facebook, yet you're still active on it. What's it been like to go from the first testers through to now?
It's really interesting because I've been an early adopter always, but this is the first time that I've been on something before it launched. So essentially for its entire life to date, and that's an incredible experience to kind of be an observer, but also a user, but seeing it from a photographer's perspective and from a perspective of design and business and strategy. Yeah. It's a marvel, and I mean, I'm active in a relative term. I think the last time I posted anything in my feed was January, and that's not for a lack of having things. Over the last 4 or 5 years, I've gone a handful of like 2-3 month spans without posting things but I'm still very active on Instagram stories, for instance. And so I still engage with it on a daily basis. And I think it's a miracle of product design, honestly. Not that Instagram gets everything right, and I'm critical when they get something wrong that I know professionally they're getting wrong, or they're getting wrong for different reasons, not by accident. But what they've done brilliantly is kept it essentially simple. In essence, the app has added features, but it hasn't changed the feature that it had at the beginning, which was that you can launch it and take a picture and share it. And it's a miracle, I think, that it doesn't need to be any more complicated than that still. It can be, but that's a decision for everyone who uses it. And I think also the fact that so many people use it just as a consumption tool rather than sharing, because that's still the overwhelming stats are that most users just look, they don't contribute in. That's also a miracle of design. And it's done very intentionally. Think about everything else that has been broken in its interaction. And so I'm constantly fascinated by that as a user of it, as a photographer. It's the reason that I was able to become a photographer in any kind of professional sense. I got attention because of that it was already on my list to start doing some paid work as a photographer before Instagram came along. But I had a 3 to 5 year timeline, and I knew I'd work it out. It shortened that timeline and gave me a lot more attention and a higher profile than I could ever have achieved in that same timeline just based on my work alone. And so I'll forever be thankful for that. And I know it's done that for a lot of other people, some of my friends and some other people. And the biggest thing is that it's managed to stay relevant. Like there aren't many things that require so much time and engagement from both sides of everyone who's involved with it that are still as strong as Instagram is. And it's just, thinking about how it was before it launched, there were 20 or 30 people on it testing. So when you said that got 19 likes, like assuming none of those are new, that's pretty good. That's like
you were like, yes. Today that would be like 90% of the users today would be like gazillions. Yeah.
Well, I mean that's insane. It's insane, right? Like that's basically the equivalent, except it wasn't. It was just a handful of people. But still, it was. So it's not the same thing it was back then. And a lot of things, like in the design industry, there's a thing called Dribble that a lot of people post work in progress to. And I was a beta tester of that as well. I knew the founder, Dan Cederholm, and it was the same kind of thing. There were like 20, 30 people on it in the early days, and it was private for maybe 6 months. And that I lost interest in afterwards, because what I loved about that was that closed loop of people who were other designers and creatives who I really, really loved and respected. And getting to share stuff with them was just kind of like a nicer way of sharing than AIM or any other, like back when we used AIM for messaging. Yes. And where with Instagram, the people who were on it as beta testers, I knew 2 or 3 of them from the design industry, but they weren't photographers. Like it gave me access to both fans of my photography, which was a new thing to me, and also to other photographers who I could be friends with, which was also a new thing to me because I just didn't have a community, a social group of photographers. And some of my best friends right now are people that I've met because of Instagram in one way or another. And that's an amazing thing too. So it's and I still like it.
It's interesting because I mean nowhere near at the same level, but I happened to be at university when Facebook was brought to the UK. I happened to be at one of the universities that was the first one there. And so, again, not at the same level by no means, but I was probably in the first couple of thousands of Facebook users in the UK. And I fell out of love with Facebook within 2 years of that. Now, I'm back there with business and stuff, and I can now see why, but, you're saying, oh, I'm not sure I'm active, I only consume stories. I mean, that's amazing for an app to do that. And also, I read something recently about the guys you'll know, the Instagram founders who were design obsessed. So for you, it is almost like design, business, photography. I mean, this is the Dan Rubin app, right?
Oh yeah. Oh, I knew right away, and I was I was such a fan of it to begin with. I got so many designer friends of mine on it because I didn't have photography friends back then. So, and some of them are still active on it, and it's for most of them, it's just something they play with. But it's like I knew, it was an app that I felt was very much meant for me. Much like when I watch Wes Anderson films, I feel like he's framed everything for my sensibilities. Like I can pause at any time and I just go, yep, everything's exactly right. I love it.
So do you still have Mark Zuckerberg's mobile number? Can you still be like, mate, I've just seen it and there's this bug, if you want to...
I think I can. I think I'm thankful I've never had Zuckerberg's number. That's a level of interaction into the tech world that I'm
about to say. Don't worry, he's got yours as well as all your other data. Don't worry.
I know, Zuck. If you ever want to chat, you have my number somewhere.
He's
got
listening
all
to this. He's also listening to this. That's the.
He's listening to this right now. He's recording this as well, by the way.
No, I think it's fascinating because it does. It has over the years, I think, overshadowed a lot of photographers' marketing thoughts one way or another. Everyone knows somebody who has had something that's really helped. Everyone, I think, also can feel like you can spend a lot of hours there and not really get any further. So it's fascinating to hear that the design ethic that it started with, in your eyes, is at least still visible, which after a corporate takeout, jokes about Facebook aside, any business like that founded on such strong principles being taken over by a corporation that is looking to monetize it in the future, for you to be able to say that on any level after this long of time is amazing.
I think it's a miracle they haven't broken it. That's how I honestly feel.
That's the polite.
It will, well, it will happen eventually, and I mean it's happening in small ways, like the algorithm versus the chronological feed and other things, and that is breaking the experience, and it's why people who've been on it for a long time don't like it as much. But it's also why I've loved it but kept my distance. So I've never made any of my approach to photography all about Instagram, right? So much like I said right at the very beginning about wanting people to like my photography for the work, not for the medium. That medium includes things like Instagram. I have turned down a lot, to my financial detriment. I've turned down a lot of business over the last 6-7 years where clients were trying to hire me just for access to my audience, and that had nothing to do with the type of work I was doing. There wasn't any kind of creative discussion going on, and I just wanted nothing to do with that. And I could have said yes to a lot of it and just put money in the bank, but I didn't want to be an influencer, right? I didn't.
Is that people being like, we want you to do photography for us, but so you post it on your Instagram with tags?
Yeah.
So it was less.
Yeah, and it was just because they were looking at numbers. That was it. And I'm saying that knowing that a lot of the people who have come to me, especially 6-7 years ago, they were coming to me not because of my photography reputation. They were coming to me because I was one of the early photographers who was on Instagram and I had an audience and they wanted access to that. But I would turn them down if it wasn't a good fit for me creatively. I would say yes to it otherwise, but it was because I knew that if I did that work and put in my portfolio, that would last longer than the brief interaction that the client wanted because of the numbers. And whenever I had that conversation with a potential client, I knew if it was going to be a worthwhile client, if they appreciated the fact that I was thinking bigger picture than what they needed to achieve their particular metrics. And those are the kind of relationships I've always tried to foster, whether it was with ad agencies or PR agencies or directly with clients. And that's led to me having longer term relationships with clients because they're coming to me the same way as they are coming to a lot of people who have audiences but aren't trying to be something bigger. And I feed back to them and I challenge them and I say, okay, well, how can we make this brief better? And hey, have you thought about this? And because I'm trying to make the best work possible. And well, the clients who do love that are clients that you want to work with and want to work with again and build a relationship with. So that's the other thing I'd say to any photographers who are listening, because I still get so many questions with people clearly feeling pressured to be on Instagram and be good at it, whatever that means, and build an audience. you have, like, there are too many people I've seen who put all their eggs in one basket, and there's a lot of benefit to social media as an artist, as a creative, as a business, but you have to not throw yourself at just whatever seems to be popular and where the attention is. You have to, like, make a list of what you think, what are the pros and cons, what are the investment that you're willing to make into it, time wise and energy wise, in order to get back X. And then you have to constantly measure it. It's why I stopped posting to the feed every once in a while, because I'm not getting back from it enough to make it worth the time to stress over what I'm going to post and curating things. I'd rather I still love my images. I've been shooting loads and loads of stuff that's just not shared because I've got other things that I'm more interested in at the moment than doing that. I know other people who spend 4 hours minimum on Instagram cultivating things every day, and they feel like they have to. And if I felt like I had to, I would stop using it immediately. I'd delete my account.
So instead, you go on Dribble and post your photos there.
Oh, God, I haven't used Dribble in probably as long as I haven't posted on my blog.
Is there somewhere that you? Because I think there's two things. There's one that is definitely like the monetizing, the curating an audience, blah blah blah, and I'm always very envious of people who seem to have those beautiful grids that like line up and stuff. And I'm like, even if I try that within 2 days, I might have forgot. Is there somewhere? And then there's also the people who use it as to share with family, friends, wider community. And the film photography is fantastic on Instagram and Twitter because people put photos there, and it does feel like it probably should have done right at the start of, these are people I want to see and I want people to comment and I want people to interact, not from a monetizing a brand stuff, more of a for fun. Do you have something like that? Do you use Flickr? Do you put your images out there in that way, or is it literally they're for you, they're for your clients?
I don't. I mean,
audio,
this is possibly a very selfish opinion, but I also think it's okay. I shoot for me. The part that I love the most about photography is everything that leads up to and includes pressing the shutter. That is my favorite part, the finding of the image, the making of the frame. I like the result a lot, and now that I'm getting into developing because of this lockdown, I'm also really loving that, and I love all of it. And I love sharing images as well. I love seeing people make a connection to images that I've made. But I don't love those things as much as I like that hunt, that search for the frame. And so it's less important for me to publish things than it is to capture things. And I should, like, from a business perspective, it's important to publish things, but you can have a portfolio site that you haven't updated in 2 years, and as long as it's still representative of the work you want to do, it'll still do its job. I don't have a portfolio site because I spent over 15 years building things for the web, and when I got into photography, I was looking for things to take me away from screen time and building things for the web. So I like to experiment on myself a lot. Kind of scientific method.
There'll be several follow-up questions coming from that one. Yep.
And the follow-up, we're going to have to do a separate live on that. But no, but I like to use like a simplified scientific method on myself, whether it's with diet or exercise or sleep patterns or tools. And one of the things that I wanted to do, knowing so much about the web, I looked at all the, when I was becoming a photographer and I was starting to get requests for work because of Instagram, I thought maybe I should have a portfolio. Every other photographer has a portfolio. And then my brain immediately went to, well, everyone else has one. Why do they have one? Do they have one because they need one, or do they have one because everyone else has one? And I thought, well, the only way to know that for sure is to not have one and see, because then I can say, I know where the work has come from. I know that it's come from Instagram, and because that's the only place it could have come from, unless people see my work elsewhere, like in a magazine or something like that. But then they'll tell me. And I'd done a similar experiment a few years before with my agency that my brother and I ran. We'd kept a portfolio with updated case studies, and like with every other agency, you'd have to apologize for people for it being a year out of date when you talk to a new client, and that it was just this constant thing of feeling the pressure to keep it updated. And at some point I thought, you know what, we're asking all these clients where they found us and why they've hired us, and none of them have said because of your portfolio site. So I thought, let's just take it down. Let's like eliminate that pressure and just have a list of clients that they'll recognize because we had enough a half dozen or more big name clients, and we'll just list them down. They don't need, if they want to see the work, they should ask us, and then we'll show them the work while we're in conversation. But we went to a one-page site that hasn't changed since. It's just like been updated and tweaked. And it just has an email address, how long we've been in business. Here are some clients that we've worked for that get in touch if you want to work with us. Because we realized it was all reputation driven. And our incoming requests didn't change a bit for our agency. So I basically ran the same experiment on myself. Now, fast forward 7-8 years later, after deciding I was going to become a photographer in part commercially. And now my interest in Instagram is waning as a method of getting clients, because now there are so many people on it that it's a signal to noise ratio issue.
Yeah.
So now I'm trying to decide, do I have a portfolio? I don't want just a portfolio because, again, everyone has one. Signal to noise. How are they going to find the portfolio in the first place? It's not going to stand out in any way as an item. So I'm experimenting with email as a potential method. Like, I love email newsletters. What if you could get a chronological feed of my photos just showing up in your inbox by subscribing, but it would be like once a week or, something like that. Maybe people would like that. So that's one experiment I'm going on.
It's nice. I like it.
I'm getting more interested in motion and in directing. And I think like that's interesting to me because it removes the pressure of constantly having to share things. Because what you do is you constantly work on things without anyone seeing anything. And then you release a thing into the wild, whether it's a short story or a feature length. But that release cycle, the pressure of that is much, much, much slower. And that's the thing I don't really like about Instagram. I'll share a lot on Instagram if I feel like sharing it a lot, but if I had to, it's just not interesting. So I don't know if that kind of answers your question or not.
No, it's fascinating because obviously I spend a lot of time thinking about marketing with a different business and with a different set of criteria. But that approach of doing the things that everyone does because they're doing it, being very focused on it. And I love that idea of the only way of testing is to remove things. And in today's world where everyone is trying to sell you a marketing solution in every possible channel, like if you don't have 100 channels, then you're missing out on the 101st kind of thing. To be able to say, bullshit, like you put up a page, if you've heard of me, or, the work has to stand for itself and the work has to stand somewhere, but that doesn't have to be on something that we know the business of Facebook, of Instagram, of Twitter is you providing content. If I don't do that, am I really going to be shut up? Because they don't care if I don't get work or do get work. There's a mismatch right from the start on
exactly
on who's after what within those. And I think that's why I personally still enjoy Instagram, because there's a business benefit. Every time I've tried to measure it, it's fairly minimal. But it allows me to do something that I do quite enjoy, but I don't feel the pressure.
Oh, that's the
point.
point.
A week.
Yep.
And if I post 3 times a day,
well, and I think it's about, like, for me, and it sounds like for you, like there's a longer term benefit of connecting with people over a long period of time, which is much harder to measure. But that's kind of brand, right? And that's what building a brand is. It's not measuring in single like points. It's measuring over time. And it's measuring goodwill and reputation. And for me, that's the thing. It's what people are always surprised that I reply to their comments and their questions on Instagram and on Twitter, because they figure that someone with a lot of followers won't.
You have a team to do it. You have a team.
But I've literally had clients who are really surprised that I don't have a team managing my Instagram DMs and things. And I went, why? It doesn't actually take that much time, and I enjoy doing it. But I think that's the thing. I enjoy connecting with people. I enjoy teaching. I enjoy sharing. And if there's and that's what it does for me more than being a portfolio. It does act like a bit of a portfolio for me. But if I wanted a portfolio, I'd print one and I'd send it to people directly. And I'm in the process of doing that. I'm designing a portfolio book because there are people who I want to send a printed thing to.
Yeah.
And that's a much more personal thing than, maybe they'll look at it, maybe they won't, but I know they'll get it. And that's something that you can't even do with email.
Yeah.
So I'd say to anyone who's listening and feeling that pressure of whether it's social media or having a portfolio or anything else, the biggest advice that it works no matter what. It works for a big brand, it works for a small brand, it works for an individual. Look at what everyone else is doing, but before you do it, think about why you're doing it and what benefit it'll get to you, and look just to the left and the right of what everyone else is doing, because there might be something a little bit more unique that you could do that no one else is doing, and you put your investment into that, and the return will likely be so much better, even if it's just your enjoyment, because we don't tend to enjoy just copying other people. That's not as fun.
No, that's work. As soon as you say that, I'm like, that's work.
Exactly. Yeah.
We tried a similar sort of experiment really with our podcast, because we looked at the podcasts that were out there, especially sort of the Analogue photography podcast, and how everyone was using names of the podcast to sort of describe what the podcast is about. And we thought, well, why don't we go with a title that says nothing about what the podcast is about? And we called ours the Sony 16 podcast, which says nothing about analog photography. I thought, well, let's see how that goes. It wasn't a good idea. Nobody found us. And,
No, Graham, that's not fair. Both of your listeners really enjoy it. They've told me.
That's true, they do. And they are lovely folks as well. They really are. And we've got that personal connection. It's great.
No.
I love the title though too. So, but that, I think that's a great example. Like
it's a brand.
Because what it is that like there is nothing else titled like that. And once people find it, they have more of an ability to love it than if it was just something that was formulaic.
I know. Whenever people, if I get people asking me business advice on like how to brand something, and you've got to make it what it is so Google likes it, that kind of stuff, I always just say the Virgin Company. What does Virgin Media do? And if you pause for more than half a second and think about it, there's no way Google should allow that on the freaking internet. But of course, it's a brand. It's a brand. So I think that's really different. Now, I'm very conscious, Dan, I could literally talk for the next 3 hours. There is 5 minutes left until we said we would release you back into your world of 8 businesses, 3 creative projects, and Dribble. Is there
those experiments? That's what's led to the Dribble.
Exactly. Nobody else is building a photography business on Dribble, so it's an opportunity.
Maybe that's the next thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Is there anything that we haven't covered that you would like to say? I mean, the thing that I think I had in my closing questions were one piece of business advice, one piece of photography advice. You've sort of given us both there with the look slightly left or right. I love it. But is there anything that you think for people who analog photographers in the UK who are probably struggling with a whole mix of creative and business and financial stuff at the moment, is there anything you'd like to say, or any closing thoughts?
But yeah, the big thing, especially right now when it feels like so much control has been taken away and so many things are out of our control, and that's not something that is unique to this time. It's just what's unique is that everyone's feeling it at once, and it's such a big deal. The thing to do is just find any little bit of control that you can and take it. Like I said earlier, one of the things that served me really well these last 8 weeks is that really early on, I decided that rather than wait to see what various governments and airlines and regulatory bodies would do eventually, I would just say, I know where this is going. I'm going to put a stop to the things that I think are going to be canceled anyway, so that I can free my mind to do new things, whatever those might be. I just needed to not be waiting. And taking back control like that helped, because now everything I've been doing, and now I'm crazy, like doing too many things, but it's because, but they're all things that I'm throwing myself at, I'm choosing to do. And it's all because I took that control in the beginning. And sometimes, some days that control is going to be a small thing, like just allowing yourself to be okay with not being productive is control in that way. Otherwise you feel out of control, like you're failing. And sometimes it's baking some sourdough. Sometimes it's going out with your camera and just finding things in your neighborhood to photograph, even though they're not the kind of subjects that you would normally photograph. I've been doing that a lot lately because it's all I kind of have easily accessible. And initially I was pushing back on it, and I just realized after a week or two of going, I don't want to take pictures around here, it's boring. I went, all right, that means I have to go take pictures around this neighborhood because it's boring and I need to make it interesting. And again, me making it interesting was just reframing it and taking back control. So whatever you can do for that day by day, the more of that you build up, the more in control you'll feel and the better your brain will be operating. So whether that's about your business, whether that's about your creativity, or something that has nothing to do with either of those two, just life in general, it helps. And you'll find that changes your momentum. And the counterpart to that is that understand that everyone you know is probably feeling a version of the same thing. So the more people you can share that with, even if there's one other person who gets it, who's like you, who does the similar kind of thing to you, bounce the ideas off them. That helped me the most in the first few weeks. It's why so many ideas were triggered, is that it wasn't just in my head, it was other people who were in the same kind of boat. And it's such a relief to kind of just have someone to listen to and complain to, but not just complain to, kind of go, how are we going to take control back here? What could we do? What could we possibly, that? Okay, cool. Yes, whatever. Yes. Any string that we can pull on. So, and it helps, again, outside of a pandemic. That's not the C word, see? Outside of a pandemic, it also works because creatives get stuck all the time. So, just that's just a good life lesson.
No, and I think that is such, as I said, like it really stuck with me. The brief chat we had around one of the rescheduling of that time was that deliberately give yourself the space to freak out, because you are anyway. So call it what it is. Do it.
Yep. Have the tantrum.
Do it, and then crack on. I mean, I have a toddler, so she took that advice to heart, and frequently
sick of your tantrum.
Exactly. She lives in the moment, but it's true, like that whole thing. Graham, do you have any last thoughts, questions for Dan before we release him?
I have one last question, Dan, because your life seems like it's full on, and the traveling and the workshops and the teaching and everything. It sounds like it's just a constant go, go, go. And now that you've had this forced stop and reevaluate and look, do you want everything to go? Are you thinking, I can't wait till this is all over and things can just pick back up exactly as they were and straight back on? Or is there an aspect of it where you think, no, once all this starts again, things are going to be different because you've actually had that break to look at it and go, what was I doing?
It's kind of a mixture. I'd already had a plan for later this year, for August and September, to try and not book any work in or any travel, in order to spend that time looking at flats in a couple of cities and countries, because like I've got my list. I just haven't given myself that time. And when you're moving around as much as I am, it's not a matter of just simply wanting to slow down and stop. It's like you have to have time to look at flats, otherwise you just can't find one. So I'd already had that in the plan for this year, because I lived in Greenwich for about 6 months back in 2018, and that was a first attempt at kind of going, well, I'd been nomadic a little for a couple of years before that, and that had allowed me to do a lot of things, but I was exhausted by it. So I then went and got a flat, and then I decided that I needed to be nomadic again because of the things that it enabled. But I've wanted to slow down for a while. The reason that I'm constantly traveling and moving around isn't because I want to be constantly traveling and moving around. It's because a lot of the things I enjoy doing require that or lead to it. So things like workshops. I love taking workshops to destinations and taking them to people. Well, that means I can't, like if I just host workshops in London, for instance, or if I were living in Edinburgh and I was only hosting things in Edinburgh, people would have to come to me, and that would mean that I could reach fewer people. And so for me, it's about, like, the travel is because that allows me to reach more people in the teaching sense. In the travel photography sense, well, you got to travel for it. And I love that. So that's just kind of natural. Yeah. In the collaboration on hardware products, I like to work with people. So, and I like this, Zoom and Skype and everything else is just fine, but I like to be where other people are. And it's easier right now for me because I don't have a partner. I don't have children yet. It's easier for me to be the one who travels. So I do that. I'd visit my family because it's cheaper for one person to fly to Florida than it is for 5 people to fly anywhere else. So there is a mixture of things going on all at once, but it's why a lot of people have said, "Oh, how are you handling not traveling all the time?" I'm like, I'm handling it great. I lived in my hometown for over 30 years. Like I'm really used to not moving around and living in a lot of places. I'm not actually eager to, like, a lot of people can't wait to get back to what they were doing before. I'm eager to have those workshops and those tours and travel things and products launch, but they'll happen eventually. If they don't happen for 2 or 3 years, even, totally fine. They'll still be viable. I'm also eager to be able to flat shop later this year. Like, that's so that I can continue being static, but somewhere that isn't my brother's old bedroom. So I think I will always be like on the move somewhere, but it's not because of being on the move. It's because of wanting to do things desperately that involve being in different parts of the world. And I also just genuinely love seeing other cultures and struggling to speak other languages. And I get a lot of joy from that. And you learn a ton that way. So my whatever partner ends up being the one that sticks around, they're going to really have to be okay with not just okay with like need to be a woman who really likes the idea of seeing the world and being a citizen of the world just like I do. And eventually that'll happen, and it won't slow me down. People keep saying, "Oh, when you meet someone," I'm like, "I've done that before, and it wasn't the traveling or the lack thereof that like made it not work." So, you know.
Yeah, and so it sounds like you're looking for maybe not a permanent place, but a base to flat shop. So would it be true that if, for example, we did some kind of petition that meant that you were UK based rather than Spain, that would work, and we'd get Dan Rubin?
I've got bunk beds.
Yeah, Graham's got bunk beds, and you've got a dark cream
there we
shed,
go,
don't you? So Graham,
job done.
Yeah, Graham,
Yeah.
There we go. Flatmates.
Well, I think that it has actually come down to that, where a lot of my friends who are spread out around the world are starting to petition me you should live here, because like then you'd be around here all the time. That's already started, so you just have to add the petition to the list. Add your city to the list.
All right, great. We'll quickly log on to Dribble and start the petition, and then it'll be grand. Right, I think we'll have to call it there, because we're already overrunning from when we took you, and honestly, we really, really appreciate it. It's our evening. We're drinking booze. You're halfway through your working day still. So thank you.
It's been brilliant. I'm going to get back to my working day and run to the post office, actually. So but enjoy the rest of your evenings, and for everyone who's tuning in wherever you are, thank you so much for encouraging my behavior.
No, it's interesting actually, because I noticed that there were a few questions coming in as it was happening, and then we've just had a comment there that Dale said, "You can tell how interesting the interview has been," and Dan, because people haven't been distracted by just writing to each other on the YouTube. So no, I think people have really enjoyed it.
Oh, bless.
Honestly,
That's
thank
great.
you so much. I knew when I was inviting you on that we would get film photography chat and wisdom, and we've definitely had both of those. So on that note, thank you once again. We'll log off from YouTube. Thanks everyone for listening. As I said briefly on social media, Matt Day has a family appointment at the moment, so we've pushed him back to next week. So hopefully in a week's time we'll have Matt Day on. Obviously, as always, there'll be opportunity to ask questions in advance and things. Otherwise, have wonderful weeks. Stay safe. Enjoy interpreting the government guidance as best you can. And we'll see you again soon. Thank you so much.
Thanks again.